Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today I am going to continue the discussion of segregation. You were assigned a reading for this week, and I really hope that you have read that assignment. The assignment was a reading by W.E.B. Du Bois called Mr. Booker T. Washington and Others, of Mr. Booker T. Washington and Others. And I just wanted to say a quick word about Du Bois before I continue. Du Bois was born in 1868, and he died in 1963, so he made 95 years of age. I will talk more about Du Bois as the semester continues. But what I wanted to say right now is that Du Bois was, in my opinion, the greatest scholar in the United States in the 20th century. And that's no a small thing. I think that, of course, in today's contemporary world, we get excited about the actors that we see and the actresses that we see, the sports figures, who's the best quarterback, or who is the best in the NBA. But when I say that someone is the greatest scholar of the 20th century, what I'm saying is something that I hope would be of great concern to you. A good scholar, and not all scholars are good. There are cheap scholars, scholars who are simply looking to do a job and be done with it when their day is over. But a good scholar is a person who, in one fashion or another, accurately or most accurately reflects and is able to articulate the meaning of the society, the meaning of the history of that society, in ways that allow all of us to better understand the society and the environment in which we live. We are thrown into a maelstrom when we are born. We're thrown into a tremendous storm. And most of us, in my opinion, most of us really don't make the kind of effort that we need to make in order to understand our place in that storm. A scholar, a great scholar, such as Du Bois, is a man who helps us better understand what that storm is about, and in understanding what that storm is about, enables us to act intelligently in the face of that storm. So, enables us to act in ways that bend reality a little bit in the direction of creating perhaps a more humane society. In the reading I gave you, which I hope that you've done, and which I hope that if you haven't done, you will do, because you now understand why these readings by great scholars like Du Bois are important. In the reading I gave you, Du Bois basically argued that segregation in the South emerged as the result of a three-sided social struggle, And amongst those sides, or the actual participants in this three-sided social struggle, included white Northerners. And not all white Northerners, but principally the white Northern elite class. The white Northern elite class had a distinct interest in how affairs would develop in the South. And so they contributed to the development of segregation in the South. The second class of people that we are going to look at in terms of the development of segregation are the Southern whites. And here, when we say Southern whites, we're talking about two distinct classes of people: the well-to-do Southerners and the poor whites of the South. And they each have their own reasons for acting, but whatever their own reasons are, in the most important respects, they act in unity relative to the black population. And then the third area that is involved in this three-sided social struggle is, of course, the Southern black community. And in my opinion, this is the most important of the three elements, because if the Southern black community had simply gone along with the program of the Southern whites and the Northern whites, then there wouldn't have been a problem. And they would have simply put themselves in the place demanded of them by the poor whites of the South. It's the fact that they resist the demands of the Southern whites and the Northern whites that makes a history that we are going to look at today. So that's the first thing I wanted to say about the Du Bois article. It puts forward this vision of a three-sided social struggle. The other thing I wanted to say about the Du Bois article is that it talks about the leadership of this man named Booker T. Washington. In just about every major American city with a major black community within that city, invariably there is a Booker T. Washington High School. And the reason for that is that from the period of the 1890s, the early mid-1890s, for the next 20 years till 1915 and Booker T. Washington's death, Booker T. Washington is the preeminent leader of black people in the United States. Du Bois, I think you will see, argues that that leadership was not a leadership that was granted by black people willingly. It was something that was, to one degree or another, imposed upon black people. And we'll talk about how that goes down. But the main thing that I wanted to say is this, is that Du Bois here places responsibility on Booker T. Washington's shoulders, responsibility for the emergence of segregation, a responsibility in the surrender of black rights. And I also gave you, but you also had a reading this week on Booker T. Washington's address to the Atlanta Cotton Exposition. And this address, more than anything else, puts Booker to 1895, puts Booker T. Washington on the in the national spotlight. He becomes, after that speech, the preeminent leader of black people in the United States. In that speech, Washington makes an argument. The argument that Washington makes is that black people should not be struggling for political rights, that black people should not be struggling for social or civil rights, that what black people need to focus upon in the South in 1895, when he makes that speech, is economic development. That is to say that black people should focus on doing whatever job they do well. Contribute by so doing to the economic advancement and well-being of the South. And that if they follow that path, if they develop the economy, if they accumulate property, that the white South will recognize the contribution of black people to the South's economic development, and thereafter welcome black people to all the rights that are black people's due. That's the program of Booker T. Washington. To abandon the struggle for civil and political rights and to fight on the grounds of the economy. And in being successful, they will win these other civil and political rights. That's Washington's program. And Du Bois says that Washington's program is fundamentally flawed. And this is what we will look at over the course of the next several mini lectures. All right. I want to now begin with a discussion of the interest and the role of the northern white elite class in the struggle that is unfolding in the South following the close of Reconstruction. I want to name some names. I want to name the names of some of the people who are key players in this northern white elite class attempting to influence events in the South. These are people with names like Andrew Carnegie. I hope you've heard of Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie, the first great steel monopolist in United States history. Started with a single steel manufacturing facility and becomes the most successful steel manufacturer in the United States, providing most of the steel in the eastern part of the United States. So the first great steel monopoly, the product of Andrew Carnegie's business expertise. John D. Rockefeller Sr., John D. Rockefeller Jr., the first great oil monopolist in American history. Consolidated control of oil fields all over the country and made gazillions of dollars doing it. J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan, probably the most powerful of the men I have named to this time. Probably the most powerful man in the United States in this period of American history. A banker. A man who buys the Carnegie steel mills from Carnegie, just writes out a piece of paper. Here's what I'm going to give you for your steel mills, $500 million. Passes the paper, and then owns and develops a still larger steel monopoly called United States Steel. So he's a banker. He owns the largest steel monopoly probably in human history, certainly in American history. He owns a good deal of the railway system of the United States, buys that up too, including the Southern Railway system. So these men are men of extraordinary business acumen, and they believe that they can bring the same kind of expertise that they have that's enabled them to rise to the very pinnacle of Northern American society. They believe that they can bring that same expertise to the profitable resolution of problems, first of all in the United States, but then throughout the whole of the world. There's one other man whose name I must mention here, and that man's name is William Henry Baldwin. Now, Baldwin was not a figure of the same category as Carnegie or Morgan or the Rockefellers. He was an employee of J.P. Morgan. He was the head of the Southern Railway system, so he lived in the South. But I mention his name because he is really the ideological representative of this northern elite business class in the South. That is, he's the ideological point man. He's the man who is, from the standpoint of northern business, defining what it is that they should be doing, that northern business should be doing in order to shape the South in the ways that are most favorable to the continued political and economic power of this northern elite class. And so it is William Henry Baldwin, above all, who formulates the objectives that these northerners bring with them to southern social problems. So here is what I've discerned as the objectives that these northern industrialists and financiers have in relation to the South. First of all, they want to reconcile the northern and the southern elites. The northern and the southern elites had, since the Civil War, and really before the Civil War, had been at loggerheads. They've been constantly clashing, and the Civil War brings that clash to a head. And it brings that clash to a head with a victory of the northern over the southern elites. And the southern elites, the rich white southerners, the former plantation owners, and the men who would take the place of those plantation owners, bear a great deal of resentment to the northern elite class. And so one of the goals that William Henry Baldwin and these elite northerners have is to reconcile, to work together with the southern elite so that instead of conflict, they can have cooperation, and with cooperation, more profits. First thing I want to say about the reconciliation of northern and southern elites is that there is a solid ground of understanding between the two sides. And that solid ground of understanding is, of course, the ideology of white supremacy. Carnegie, Rockefeller, J.P. Morgan, these men do not doubt the truth of white supremacy. In fact, they understand white supremacy as justifying really the extension of American control and their control specifically over larger and larger populations across the face of the planet. You can't subordinate people in South America, dark-skinned people of South America. You can't subordinate them to your needs without that doctrine of white supremacy. And so they share a common doctrine of white supremacy. Create a long-term social stability, a second objective that these men have for their work in the South. The difficulty is that in the Reconstruction years, as I've pointed out, there's really an ongoing state of warfare throughout the South. Warfare to deprive black people of their rights. Following the close of Reconstruction, that warfare continues. Black people still are voting. It takes from 1890 to 1910 to eliminate the black vote throughout the South. Black people are still voting. Every time there's an election, there's violence. Every time black people try to assert some kind of rights in the South, there's violence. And so, from the standpoint of northern business, when you have a period of great social instability, you can't really make profit. You can't make profit because people don't have confidence in the long-term viability of such a society. And so you don't invest in that kind of society. You don't commit anything of yourself to that kind of society. So from the standpoint of making profit, we have to achieve a certain level of social stability. And then, of course, the long-range objective, make a more profitable South. These are the objectives that the northern industrialists and financiers bring to the table. At the heart of these the heart of achieving these objectives, white Northerners brought a vision for the role of black people in the South. And the role of black people in the South, according to the northern white elite classes, was to be the menial labor of the South. To be the menial labor of the South as modern workmen are the menial labor of the South. Not as a slave had been the menial labor of the South, but as a modern workman, as a workman capable of doing the job of modern industry and modern agriculture. Here's William Henry Baldwin talking about that role and about what it means to be a modern workman. Time has proved that he, the black man, is best fitted to perform the heavy labor in the southern states. The Negro and the mule is the only combination so far to grow cotton. The South needs him, needs the black man, educated to be a suitable citizen. Properly directed, he is the best possible laborer to meet the climatic conditions of the South. Again, reference to these climatic conditions. Only black people can work in the semi-tropical southern region. He will willingly fill the more menial positions and do the heavy work at less wages than the American white man or any foreign race which has yet come to our shores. This will permit the southern white laborer to perform the more expert labor and to leave the fields, the mines, and the simpler trades for the Negro. So long as the Negro is down, the white man will stay down. 8 million ignorant Negroes must be an eternal drag on their white neighbors. So what Baldwin is arguing here is this, is that so long as you have 8 million black people in the South who are not educated to play the role of a modern workman, ignorant, then the whole South will be held down. A modern workman needs to know how to read. To follow instructions, a modern workman has to know how to read and how to do simple arithmetic. The difficulty, so this is the vision, the first level of a vision that the northern elite class brings to white Southerners, and the white Southerners panic. White Southerners panic at the thought of putting the word educate and Negro in the same sentence. during slavery, it was illegal to even teach a black person how to read. And white Southerners panic because the way they've always understood education is that education is dangerous, and that if you educate black people, they will know that the position they are in is not the position that they should be in. And so William Henry Baldwin has his work cut out for him. If he wants to win white Southerners to an understanding of what education means, a non-threatening kind of education, he's got to explain it a little bit more. And he does explain it a little bit more. What he is talking about is a non-threatening education. Something that comes to be known as industrial education. Baldwin addresses the fears of these white Southerners. He says, look, after the Civil War, I mentioned to you that one of the principal demands of the freed population, the former slave population, was education. And education came in the form of what Du Bois calls the Great School Marm Migration. At the close of the Civil War, hundreds of white women came south from New England and set up schools throughout the South. And they set up schools throughout the South just as though the young and older and children, the young children and the older children, and even the adults who came to those schools were just normal human beings, normal New Englanders. They didn't do anything different in the South vis-a-vis the education of this black population than they would have done in the North if they were teaching school in the North. And Baldwin says that was wrong. For although the spelling book and the Bible were necessary for the proper education of the Negro race, yet with a false point of view, the northern white teacher educated the Negro to hope that through the books he might, like the white men, learn to live from the fruits of a literary education. How false that theory was, 30 long years of experience has proved. That was not their opportunity. That was not the opportunity of black people. Their opportunity was to be taught the dignity of manual labor and how to perform it. That's the essence of industrial education. Not so much to be taught to read and write, although that's part of it, but to be taught that all work is dignified. We began at the wrong end. Instead of educating the Negro in the lines which were open to him, he was educated out of his natural environment and the opportunities which lay immediately about him. I want to pause here and say one more thing about William Henry Baldwin. I've quoted him twice now. I've told you he was the ideological leader of the northern elite class operating in the South. What I did not tell you was that he was the chairman of the board of directors of the Tuskegee Institute. The Tuskegee Institute was, of course, the educational institution that was led by Booker T. Washington. William Henry Baldwin, Booker T. Washington worked closely together, collaborated very closely together in the development of this industrial education, not to develop people's critical thinking abilities. Where is that? Like the white man, a literary education, not to develop his critical thinking abilities, but simply to be taught how to work and how to work well, and to be satisfied with simply the act of working. Let's look at the Tuskegee Institute. This is industrial education. This is what the Northern whites are advocating for. This is what Booker T. Washington produces at Tuskegee, at the Tuskegee Institute. This is a shoemaking class at the Tuskegee Institute. It looks impressive on the surface, but what this picture cannot tell you is this, is that even as these young men are being trained to make shoes, about 1,000 miles north in Massachusetts, there are machines that are making shoes. And the machines that are making shoes are making the shoes a whole heck of a lot cheaper than these young men could possibly ever make shoes by hand. What I'm saying is that even as these men are being trained in a distinct skill, that distinct skill is already obsolete. It's already outdated. But what these men are being taught, as I've said, is the dignity of manual labor. Here's what women at the Tuskegee Institute, what women at the Tuskegee Institute are trained at. They're trained at doing what they are doing in the South in this time period in any case. They're being trained as domestic workers. Baldwin, on occasion, directly addressed black Southern audiences. Here's one of those occasions. Here's a speech by, part of a speech by William Henry Baldwin, talking directly to black people. He says to black people, face the music, avoid social questions, leave politics alone, continue to be patient, live moral lives, live simply, learn to work and to work intelligently, learn to work faithfully, learn to work hard, learn that any work, however menial, if well done, is dignified. Learn that the world will give full credit for labor and success even though the skin is black. It is a mistake to be educated out of your necessary environment. It is a crime for any teacher, white or black, to educate the Negro for positions which are not open to him. Listen to what this man is saying. All this first part of his little statement here is straight Booker T. Washington. Again, reread that Booker T. Washington address to the Atlanta Continent Exposition that I gave you. And you will see that right up to this line here, even though the skin is black, face the music, avoid social questions, don't fight around social issues, don't fight around political issues, be patient, live moral lives, live simply, learn to work and to work intelligently, learn to work faithfully, learn to work hard, work hard. You tell a working population that this is what they need to do. Learn that any work, however menial, if well done, is dignified. Learn that the world will give full credit for labor and success, even though the skin is black. That's Booker T. Washington, right there.
focus on that area that will contribute to the development of the Southern economy, and white Southerners will appreciate you. That's what Washington says, and it's what William Henry Baldwin is saying here. But what I'd like to call your attention to is everything that follows. It is a mistake to be educated out of your necessary environment. It is a crime for any teacher, white or black, to educate the Negro for positions which are not open to him. It is a mistake to be educated out of your necessary environment. I want you to think about this for a second. Think about that phrase for a second. It is a mistake to be educated out of your necessary environment. What I'd like you to try to do in your mind, or take out a piece of paper and try to do it, is write that same sentence or that same phrase as a command. It is a mistake to be educated out of your necessary environment. Can you write that as a command? Can you think of a way of what that means if it were said as a command? I'll give you 10 seconds to try to do that. All right. Did you get it? It is a mistake to be... How about this? It is a mistake to be educated out of your necessary environment, translated as a command, stay in your place. That's the program of the Northern elite class relative to black people. Stay in your place. It's the program of industrial education. It's the program of Booker T. Washington. That concludes my discussion of the interest of the Northern white elite class in the South in this period where segregation is being put together. I will pick up in the next section of this lecture discussing the Southern white community. Thank you.